And so, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right into this because no one saw this coming. No one saw that when Spencer Pratt decided he was going to run for mayor of Los Angeles, that he would turn out to be the one who would blow the lid off of the fraud occurring in elections, the problems with California's election system. But yet, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. And so after reportedly meeting with the president privately in the Oval Office, you see right here in this picture, him with his son he brought along, Spencer Pratt decided to drop a bombshell of a video providing evidence, putting California's election system on blast, the no voter ID, the mail-in ballots, the janky signature verification process, all the things that Democrats call access, while you have millions of Americans who are sitting there saying, hold on, something looks a little bit off here. Who's actually protecting our voting process? And the timing of it all is important because while he is exposing what he says is happening in California, President Trump is calling out Majority Leader John Thune to pass the Save America Act. And so, as always, smash that thumbs up button. That's the best way to let me know you enjoy the content. For more, subscribe to the channel. Let's start right here.
Let's see, you look at California, look at what happened to this Spencer Pratt thing. I mean, with the votes, hundreds of thousands, probably millions of votes gone. He didn't make the runoff. He was so far ahead of third place, it was ridiculous. Maybe ahead of first place. But look at that. Look at what's happened with Steve Hilton. Had the U.S. attorney not started an investigation, they would have gotten Steve Hilton out too. So it's we're a third world country in some states with respect to voting.
Friday is the deadline for the housing. Friday is the deadline after which the housing bill will become law without your signature.
I'll make a decision. Not that I dislike it. I dislike the fact that people aren't voting for voter ID with a picture. How can you not vote for voter ID? And by the way, the public wants it 94%. Voter ID, proof of citizenship, no mail-in ballots, other than with the exceptions.
Yeah, so you heard that. President Trump imploring Senate Majority Leader John Thune to get the SAVE Act passed, as he's pointing out what he sees as the clear and evident fraud that took place in California that was able to oust Spencer Pratt from the Los Angeles mayor race and almost was able to do the same with Steve Hilton for the governor race of California. And so that takes us to the next part right here, ladies and gentlemen, where you got Spencer Pratt. He just dropped a bombshell banger on the election fraud, and I want you guys to check this out. Take a listen.
In judicial ethics, the mere appearance of potential fraud is disqualifying. Same goes here. Whether or not there is widespread fraud occurring, there certainly could be, and it doesn't matter how many times you scream, there's no widespread fraud. A lot of people believe there is, and there's no way to actually validate it. This isn't just about whether or not fraud is swinging the election. The appearance of fraud already is swinging the election. People rightly have zero faith in this janky, inefficient system. They feel like their vote isn't being counted. They feel like illegal ballots are being cast, and they're not wrong to worry about it. There's literally no safeguards in place to prevent that from happening, and way too many openings for it to occur on a massive scale.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, let's break that down because Spencer Pratt is saying that there are no safeguards in place to prevent the fraud. It's basically the honor system. And so let's take a look exactly at what he means. California's election rules, what California allows. Voter ID at polls, not really, not required. The exception they have, you can easily bypass, and we're gonna get into that. It says exceptions. Some first-time voters who registered by mail and did not provide driver's license, ID, social security number may be asked for ID. Keyword, some first-time voters. But that's not really a worry anyway, because all active registered voters are mailed a ballot. And so you don't have to show up in person and worry about using an ID because you'll get a mail-in ballot anyway. And that's how you can vote. Ballot harvesting, we understand that also, where anyone can return your ballot for you. Now, they say they can't be paid for it per ballot basis, but there are also ways these NGOs get around that. And this is something that we talked about before, ladies and gentlemen, when the DSA literally put on their website, and I'm going to bring that up real quick, how to ballot delivery, which is basically a step-by-step process on how to harass residents in order to get the votes. And if they are not supporters of the DSA, how to pass them up. And if they're unsure, how to harass them until you're able to get the vote. And so this is literally on their website, ladies and gentlemen. But there's still more. Let's go back. Same day registration. It's allowed. It says eligible citizens can register or re-register and vote within 14 days of an election, including election day, at county election offices, polling places, or vote centers. Ballot deadline. Take a listen to this. This was the big issue on why does it take so long for California to count the votes? Well, part of the reason, a major factor, is because they allow mail-in ballots to still be received within 7 days after the election, long as you postmark it and is postmarked for election day. But let's continue.
You all saw how I was neck and neck with Karen Basul on election night, nearly double digits ahead of Nithya, just as the polling predicted.
Rahman fighting tears on election night, trailing Spencer Pratt by roughly 40,000 votes and about 10 percentage points.
I dominated the in-person vote. I smashed Nithya on the mail-in ballots too. She was crying on election night. It was over. Then a few days later, suddenly Nithya started overperforming as they continued to accept ballots 7 days after the election.
But days of county mail-in ballots have changed the map.
I'm so grateful.
Rahman has now erased a 40,000 vote deficit and moved ahead of Pratt by roughly 3,000 votes, a net swing of more than 43,000 votes.
43,000 votes, which just happens to be the exact number of homeless people on the streets in LA. They assured everyone that this is normal because for some reason that they can't explain, Democrats overwhelmingly vote by mail.
There's a historical phenomenon in national voting called the red mirage.
The red mirage.
What we were calling a red mirage.
The red mirage.
Yeah. This term was coined because about some swing states count votes, usually favoring Republicans early. Then it becomes an advantage for Democrats later in the evening and then into the next morning.
You expect to see the Republican with a lead, but it's not really a lead.
Democrats vote in higher numbers by a mail-in ballot.
Historically, Democrats vote in higher numbers by mail-in ballots.
But not all Democrats, just the ones who were voting for the third place candidate, the one candidate who really needed the votes. Don't forget, there were 2 Democrats in the race.
Exactly. And this is the part that they want you to believe, ladies and gentlemen. They want you to believe that Democrats are just more prone to voting by mail-in ballots than Republicans are. Now, what seems to be a little bit contradictory of that whole entire argument is the fact that during this particular race, it only really turned out that all the Democrats who were voting by mail were voting for the individual candidate that just happened to be in third place. Because while Karen Bass did continue to receive mail-in ballots, it basically trended at a rate you can predict according to her numbers that she already had versus how many more ballots were still left to come in. But somehow for Nithya Rahman, the third place, least known candidate who did not even win her own district, ladies and gentlemen, somehow she was able to not just make up the distance, but overtake the second place, more popular candidate, more well-known candidate. And all those votes just happened to come from a particular part of Los Angeles called Skid Row, where they have a high density of homelessness going on in that particular place. Nothing sketchy to see over there though, right? But let's continue.
But for some reason, only the third place Democrat who needed the votes saw a disproportionate spike in votes several days after the election. Plus, multiple studies have shown that mail voting doesn't provide an advantage to either party. It's a myth. The media will say that claims of fraud here are without evidence. Keep in mind, an anomalous statistical spike like this is evidence of fraud. Ask any forensic accountant. It may not be necessarily proof of fraud, but it is certainly evidence of fraud. But forget the late ballots. Just because the vote swing coincidentally matched the specific LASA count of homeless people on the streets, just because NGOs that Nithya cuts checks to were hoarding ballots, just because hundreds of thousands of dead people and ex-residents who've left California were still on the voter rolls, doesn't mean anyone is taking those loose ballots and filling them out. First off, it's against the law. And we all know If it's against the law, it doesn't happen. Secondly, we have signature verification. Everyone has to sign their ballot, and a computer checks your signature. Well, except some voters can't sign, so they carved out a rule where you can just make a mark on the ballot, and a witness can sign on your behalf. It can be an X or a scribble or even a happy face, as long as a witness signs off on it. And don't forget, once they separate the ballot from the envelope, there's zero way to trace it back to the ballot to check if a sudden tranche of votes that swung predominantly to one candidate had come from a bunch of ballots with the happy faces in the signature box. The DSA instructs their ballot harvesters to go door to door and tell them to vote for Nithya Raman and even help them fill in the bubble for their preferred socialist candidates. This is explicitly illegal. A ballot harvester can't tell you how to vote, and they certainly can't help you fill out the ballot. But laws don't matter if you have no mechanism in place to prevent the crime from occurring in the first place. There is this misnomer being parroted even by staunch critics of California's rigged voting system, saying there's nothing you can do because this is all legal in California. It's not legal. Even by California's own ridiculous laws, all this stuff is still illegal. They've simply removed all the mechanisms to catch the fraud and prevent it from happening. It's like a bank heist, but California has made a law that you can't lock the bank vault. You're not allowed to have security cameras, and you can't count the money inside the vault. Robbing the bank is still 100% illegal, but there's no way to stop it from happening. Now here's the smoky backroom dealing. 5 days before my election, Gavin Newsom signed a ridiculous law that literally banned federal and independent authorities from investigating vote fraud or overseeing elections to monitor for fraud during the counting process.
That's why I'm moving forward with new legislation that would make it a felony to seize ballots before the vote has been certified by state and county officials. We will be the wall he cannot get past.
That's like banning the bank from having security cameras. Now, the timing of this was deliberate. He knows this won't hold up in court, but he did it so close to the election day, he knew the courts wouldn't be able to overturn it in time for the election. It's truly like going up against the casino. The deck is so stacked against you, you never really stand a chance. You can play if you choose, but the house will never lose. So now, in California, you can loot $950 of merchandise. You can knowingly infect someone with HIV, but if you try to prevent vote fraud,
you will be prosecuted.
How can you secure the money if you can't lock the vault? How can you catch the robbers if you're not allowed to monitor the vault? And how can you even identify if the vault were even robbed in the first place if you can't even count the money? This is what California has done with elections. Unsolicited ballots going into open mailboxes and NGOs and parking lots. Bank vault is wide open. No signature required, no ID required, no way to ID the robbers. And the beauty of their rigged system is they can have all the pageantry of this public ballot counting center. Hey, come on down. It's open to the public. Anyone can come watch so you can see just how kosher our system is.
We are inside LA County's massive ballot processing center. An assistant United States attorney arrived on scene to observe the process and ask questions.
All the fraud that does occur happens long before the ballots even hit this building. People have been pushing me to demand a recount. Why? You could recount these anonymous ballots 100 times. You'll get the same exact result. I have no doubt that they are doing a flawless job of accurately counting every single ballot in here with robotic precision. The fraud isn't here. It's here on Skid Row, where homeless people are paid a couple of bucks for their ballots.
They give you $2 to vote?
Yeah, we can speak. We shoot something.
Did they come down here and kind of tell you to vote?
Yes.
They told you who to vote for?
Since I'm voting your way, can I get a plate? You know what I mean?
It's here where socialist street animals go door to door and violate the ballot harvesting laws. People bring up the old communist adage often attributed to Stalin saying, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. No, this is the modern era of fraud. They've gotten wise. The modern communist agrees with the old communist, but just the first part. It doesn't matter who votes. It doesn't matter if it's a drug zombie being paid for their ballot. It doesn't matter if it's a DSA socialist street animal filling out your ballot. It doesn't matter if it's a blue-haired intern at a Nithya Raman-funded NGO filling out the ballots. The bank vault is wide open. The cameras have been removed, and there's no way to count the money. Now, for those of you who wanted me to fight the election, for those of you who thought I was quitting or I was bought off to step aside and quietly disappear, I'll remind you, there's a smart way to handle these things and a dumb way. Evidence is not proof. I don't say things without proof. Now, anyone saying that there's no evidence of fraud is lying. There's tons of evidence, and I was the one who got it. All those videos that you saw of homeless people admitting that they were paid for their vote, where do you think they came from? Immediately after the big spike of votes came in for Nithya, I sent my team down to Skid Row to collect evidence. We were warned by some very well-connected people that this was happening, so we acted on it immediately. But if you want to end this fraud, doing protests and bitching about stolen elections won't get you anything. You need the fraudsters to start catching charges. For that to happen, you need proof. That's what investigators do. They turn evidence into proof with a robust investigation. You think it's a coincidence that 20 FBI agents suddenly descended on Skid Row to investigate vote fraud? Why do you think they were there? You don't get evidence by going to rallies or storming the ballot processing center. You get evidence by doing real work. And the first rule of criminal investigation is you do not talk about it. Here's the reality. It's too late for my campaign. A lot of people refuse to accept that, but I can. I told you all to get your ass out and vote. Tell your friends to vote. Vote enough to beat the cheat. We didn't beat it, but that doesn't mean I quit. I don't know how to quit.
He never knew when to quit.
My goal isn't to try and salvage the campaign, just like my advocacy in the wake of the Palisades fire wasn't about my own home. It's too late for me. This is about you. This is about the next one. It's about exposing this corrupt, rigged system and changing it for the next election. If I have to be the kamikaze pilot to finally get this fixed, so be it. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this. The right way isn't easy, but it ends with commie animals and handcuffs. I will restore faith in our elections if it's the last thing I do. And to all you fraudsters out there, we've been watching you, and justice is coming.
What? So there you have that, ladies and gentlemen. Spencer Pratt dropping bombs, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm glad he said this is the evidence, not the proof, because yes, there is a difference. Because yes, it is true. Whenever you question the system, whenever you bring this up to Democrats, what do they say? We hear it all the time. Show us the proof of the widespread fraud. And the reason why they can consistently go back to that same old tired argument, because they know they basically made it impossible to prove. But what you need to do is prove the system is fraudulent. It's about showing the negligence. It's about showing the fraudulence in the systems that allow the fraud to occur. And that's what you got going on in California. When you don't require voter ID, when you allow anybody to come pick up your ballots, when you can provide a janky signature that'll pass for, hey, this counts. When ballots get mailed out to every single person, no matter if the person even lives at that residence or not. And then you can have people just knock on doors, harass residents, and collect ballots. Yeah. When you put all that kind of stuff in place and you literally put it in place yourself and opened up those loopholes, then it's fair to ask the question of why have so many guardrails basically been let down? Why are the rules made so where the fraud becomes easier to commit, harder to detect, and easier to dismiss after the fact? And so that brings us to the next clip, ladies and gentlemen, and why the president has been imploring the Senate to get the SAFE Act passed. And so let's jump into this, where you have the House Oversight Chair, James Comer. He went off on Senate Republicans who are allowing the SAFE Act to die. Take a listen.
Over these last several months, there hasn't been an informal conference of any kind between the leaders, the Republican leaders in the House and the Senate, to say what can be passed on voter ID, what can be passed out of the Save America Act. It seems like I just, maybe wishful thinking, thought that was already happening, and it seems to me like that's a big problem if it hasn't happened yet.
Unless John Thune's talking exclusively with Mike Johnson, all that I'm hearing from the Senate leadership is that they don't have the votes. Not only do they not have 60 votes, they don't have 50 votes, which I don't believe that. You know, some of these Republicans say we can't vote for that because we could lose our election. I mean, are you that weak? That's my question to any Republican senator that's up for that. Are you that weak to where if you vote for a valid ID to be shown to vote, you're going to get beat in your home state? I mean, if you're that weak, you don't need to be a United States senator. So this is something that polls in both parties overwhelmingly. It shouldn't be a problem, and I hope that the Senate will get it together and figure out something that we can pass to give the American people confidence in the integrity of the elections.
Yeah, so this is the problem with the Republican Party right now, because you do have some Republicans out there who they want to remain stagnant. It's in their best interest if they don't really do anything when they're in Washington. Show up, don't really actually get work done, which means they can't be held responsible for what's happening in Washington, what's happening in the country, because they haven't passed any bills. They haven't actually created any change. But then they could always still run back to their constituents come election season and say, we're fighting the good fight. That's why you need to reelect us. And it does work, because you have senators who end up making careers basically of hanging out in Washington without actually getting work done. And so they want to get things back to the status quo of basically not getting anything done. And President Trump doesn't represent the status quo. From the moment he arrived in Washington, one thing you can't say is that he's just been sitting around allowing things to just go business as usual. That's not what he's done. And something that Tim Burchett pointed out was exactly that, of how there are some Republicans out there who that's what they're fighting against. They're fighting against President Trump, and they're fighting against wanting the status quo to return. Take a listen.
Hey everybody, Tim Burchett. People are asking me about what's going on with the Save America Act. Well, the Senate, of course, is dragging their feet. The House has passed it twice. I've got a sneaking suspicion that they'll probably attempt to pass it or pass it so late in the dadgum game that it can't get implemented. And then they can go home and say, oh, look, we passed it, and everybody will be celebrating, patting them on the back. And then it just cannot get implemented at the state and local level in time for it to have any effect in these elections. And ultimately, I think that's what you've got. And I'm afraid in the Senate leadership, they have such a hatred of Trump and the conservative movement. They want things to go back to the status quo, which is them being called from the golf course by the Democrats when it's time to make a vote. And they do the obligatory, oh, we don't like what they're doing. And they get their crumbs off the side of the table and for their districts, and they go home and get reelected. And I'm afraid that's exactly what they're up to.
Yeah, and so this is what people also need to understand. This is why President Trump's endorsements have been so vital. When he endorses a candidate and they win, that's vital. That's important, because you need to get people in a position who are actually willing to do the work and want to get the job done, and everybody's moving in the same direction. When you have rhinos, when you have certain Republicans who they want to return back to the status quo, and they're going to fight against the current, basically, and they don't want to help him get his agenda done, it fights against everything that he's been working and trying to do, that the American people voted him in for. And anybody who's ever owned a business or a company or anything like that understands the last thing you want to deal with are people who aren't on the same page as you. That's what the Democrats are for. I don't think we need that in the Republican Party. But those are my thoughts in the update. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your comments down below. I appreciate when you guys chime in. Don't forget, you enjoy the content, smash that thumbs up. For more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.